Today I am going to continue talking about the book Single Sufficient Virtue by Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche. I am going to finish talking about the section on renunciation. The point of this renunciation, he gave two examples, quick renunciation and deep renunciation. And the important thing is to recognize the difference between the two and to develop a long-term, gradual renunciation. Hasten slowly, that you want to have this strong motivation, but give it time to develop and make sure that you can distinguish between the two. And here is a quote by Rinpoche that is, we need to have both a sincere desire to become free of samsara and an appreciation that one can only do so through sustaining recognition of the nature of one's mind. So this goes back to the text, which is about recognizing the nature of your mind and then doing the various practices that help sustain that recognition once you have had that experience. Rinpoche continues to say that, of course, if you continually implement the teachings, there's no question you will improve. This goes back to hasten slowly. Keep implementing the teachings correctly, keep practicing, take a long-term view, and this is the single best thing that you can do for yourself and for others. This will definitely benefit you as you progress on the path, and it will benefit other people because A, you will be, you might say, an inspiration for them, and B, you'll be less of a nuisance sometimes, that you will be more pleasant to be around. Rinpoche then talks about personal ambition in practice. So, of course, we want to avoid being arrogant or jealous, being competitive. A lot of what he talks about reminds me of the 7 points of mind training, which one of the slogans is, don't try to be the fastest. Don't be competitive with your fellow Sangha members. And especially, Rinpoche says, avoid being sectarian, thinking that your particular lineage is the best and the others aren't any good. Maintain an open mind, which reminds me of a bumper sticker that I saw many years ago down by the University of Eau Claire. I suspect it was on a bumper of a car that belonged to a faculty member. And the bumper sticker said, "The mind is like a parachute. It only works when it's open." So keep an open mind about other lineages of Buddhism, and even in other parts of Asia, like Zen Buddhism, Pure Land Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, which is in Thailand, for instance, Sri Lanka. Rinpoche says the reason why people become arrogant, jealous, competitive, and sectarian is they really did not start out with this intense desire to be free of samsara. So that really is something that we need to keep coming back to and renewing, reaffirming, and reminding ourselves of we are trying to free ourselves from samsara rather than make ourselves a little comfortable nest in samsara in the midst of the chaos and the confusion of samsara. We have to be mindful of our motivations for our actions. In the Mahayana, motivation is actually more important than the actions. If you have proper motivation, which is that you are going to be engaging in an action of body, speech, or mind to benefit others or to help you progress along the path so you will be more able to benefit others, then your actions will have good results. So when you see that this is what your motivation is, this is excellent. This also means that we need to continually examine our motivation rather than, I like the word, and I use this a lot, put it on cruise control and just go on habitual patterns and don't examine. So if you see any of this competitiveness, jealousy, arrogance, and so on, what it means is that there's work to do. It doesn't mean that you're a terrible person. It just means you've got work to do. And this also is a mistake that people can make, practitioners especially, is that when you see where you have work to do, you think, oh, I'm a terrible person. There's something fundamentally flawed about me, and there's really nothing I can do about it. Therefore, I won't do anything about it. And this is actually a form of laziness, pure and simple. So don't blame it on yourself. Don't blame it on others. Just get motivated to do something about it. And if you want to point the blame somewhere, point it at your ego clinging, then work on that. Rinpoche then goes on to say that there is something actually more important than pointing out instructions, which are where the guru points out the nature of your mind to you. And if you are fortunate, you recognize it. But what he says is even more important than that is faith and devotion. Faith is confidence in the Dharma, and it's confidence in our Buddha nature. It's confidence that you can travel the path and transform. This is very important. The best form of faith is not blind faith. It's more faith based on experience. Faith that, at least at the beginning, you investigate. The story that Rinpoche told began with the man having blind faith, but I'll get into that. I'm getting a little ahead here. Devotion is trust in the guru, trust in his or her instructions. And different views of the guru in the student lead to different results. A standard explanation is if you see your guru as a Buddha, you receive the blessings of a Buddha. If you see your guru as a bodhisattva, you receive the blessings of a bodhisattva. And if you see your guru as an ordinary person that maybe knows a little bit more than you receive the blessings of an ordinary person that knows a little bit more than you. So this devotion is really a very, very important part of traveling the path. Specifically, quote, faith and devotion are more important than receiving pointing out instructions, end quote. So without faith and devotion, the instructions will not be of much benefit. So then he has this story, which is a common story in Tibetan Buddhism. I heard it other places as well. Rinpoche is not the first one that I heard the story from, but it is about a servant of a nomad. And of course, he probably came from Kham, which is the area that Rinpoche came from. And Kham is noted for the people there being hillbillies, or you could say mountain billies, because they don't have hills, they just have mountains, being very isolated and not being very bright. In fact, Yeshe Gyamtso, the translator, once said during a teaching that Rinpoche's accent, his calm accent, would be comparable to him talking this way in English. Well, shucks, y'all, let's talk about the Dharmakaya. This is the attitude that a lot of Tibetans have toward people from Kham. And so this servant of a nomad had a very large nose, and it was pockmarked, and it looked a bit like a raksha bead, which are used in some malas. So this man heard that the words of the guru are simple and profound, and all you need to hear is one word or one phrase, and you will gain realization. That's what he heard. That's what he believed. So he went to see the guru at his monastery with this kind of faith. Well, he was a servant where he was living, and he had that mentality when he got to the monastery. So he started working at the monastery as a servant. He didn't ask to have an interview with the teacher. He just started working there. He didn't know enough to ask for an interview and to receive instructions. So he figured, well, if I hang around here long enough, I'll see the guru and he'll give me the instructions eventually. So one day he went to the guru's room to light a fire for the guru, and the guru entered, and he had a companion with him, and he saw the servant lighting the fire. And the guru said to his companion, Raksha nose is here. And the servant thought that this was his instruction, the phrase that the guru gave him that he was waiting for. So he started continually repeating these words, Raksha nose is here. He repeated it like it was his mantra. The man then went back home with this faith and devotion, and he kept saying, using his mala, Raksha nose is here, Raksha nose is here. He went to a cave and repeated this over and over and over, endlessly, day after day, week after week. Eventually, he developed the power to heal just by saying this mantra and blowing on the person. And this is the way Khenpo Ujin heals too. He says mantra, not Raksha noses here, though. He might say medicine Buddha or another mantra, and then he blows on you, and then he rubs, then he goes and does more mantra, and so forth. So this blowing is common with a spiritual healer. And this ability of this servant spread throughout the area. He became somewhat famous locally. And then one day, the guru that had given him these supposed instructions came to the area, and he became sick, the guru, that he developed a cyst in his throat. Rinpoche doesn't say what it is, and the other versions of the story never say what it is. I'm going to venture a guess, perhaps tonsillitis, perhaps infected tonsil. I've had that happen. There were no doctors of Tibetan medicine nearby, and the attendants of this guru became desperate, and so they called this local nomad to heal their guru. And so the servant came into the room with his mala going, Raksha nose is here, Raksha nose is here, Raksha nose is here, Raksha nose is here. The guru saw him, remembered, and laughed. He laughed so hard that the cyst burst and the guru was healed. That's how sometimes faith and devotion can work. Rinpoche continues with this story, and the guru did eventually give instructions to the man because he realized that this man had great faith and he was ready to receive these instructions. Here's another quote from Rinpoche. When someone possesses both faith and genuine altruistic benevolence, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas will actually work through that person, investing that person with their blessings, enabling them to help others. I think that's a very important point. Regardless of what you practice or what instructions you have received, if you have this altruistic benevolence and faith and devotion, your practice will go well. This is how we progress. And this is especially important with the practice of Mahamudra. He divides up what are important parts of any practice session. So he says that a sitting meditation session should begin with going for refuge and generating bodhicitta. There's a short prayer in Chenrezig practice that has this in it, 4-line prayer. And then at the end, dedicate the virtue to the awakening of all sentient beings. And then also make very sincere aspirations to be able to bring all beings to Buddhahood. And this holds true for Mahayana practices and Vajrayana practices. So they're really essential to whatever practice you do. Many of the Vajrayana practices begin with going for refuge and engendering bodhicitta and end with aspiration prayers. So whatever practice you're doing, if you include these elements, this will be a cause for liberation from samsara. This will cause our practice to grow. Now he talks a little bit more about Mahamudra and says that with Mahamudra, there are other forms of virtue that will bring progress, things that will speed up our progress. And these, he says, include what he calls ordinary virtues, such as recitation of various liturgical pujas, prostrations, circumambulation of monasteries, stupas, and so forth, making offerings to beings that are above you, and engaging in acts of generosity to other sentient beings. So these gather the two accumulations, the accumulation of merit and the accumulation of wisdom. Purification is important too, to purify our poisons of the mind, our afflictive emotions, which are desire or passion for what we find pleasant, aversion and hostility, and even anger for what we find unpleasant, and then indifference for things that we don't have a strong attraction to or aversion to. And then we get even more complicated by adding pride, arrogance, and jealousy. And we can increase desire to the point where it becomes greed. So all of these things need to be purified. And on top of that, what underlies all of this is the cognitive obscuration, which is taking that which is not self to be self and that which is not other to be other. That needs to be purified. And then all our habitual and karmic obscurations need to be purified. I was asked a question today about, well, what are habitual patterns? And the name of the person, this was on Messenger, through Facebook. The name of the person was, so I said very simply, you like rice more than potatoes. I like potatoes more than rice. That's a habitual pattern. That kind of pattern doesn't create a lot of karma. I like to explain our afflictive states of mind this way. Of those three main ones, desire, aggression, and indifference, there's one that we specialize in. We go to that one the most. Then there's a second one that we have a competency in, kind of like when you're putting a CV out there. This is my specialty, but I also have competence in that area as well. So frequently we have a lot of desire, and then sometimes we want to just, you might say, ignore the whole thing. It gets too much, and we go back and forth. So anyway, all of these habitual patterns need to be purified. Now, in Vajrayana, when we're visualizing ourselves as a deity, this is very important because this counters our attachment to outer appearances and especially our body. Quote, all appearances, including the appearances of one's own body, are no more real ultimately than illusions created by a hypnotist, illusionist, or what we experience in dreams. So by visualizing ourselves as a deity, this helps us understand this illusion-like or dream-like experience. This visualization is not real, it's not solid, it's made out of light. And by, you might say, association, our human body also is not real and does not have the characteristics or qualities that we impute to our body. So we try to generate a very vivid, intense image of our own body as the deity, and we reflect on that while we are practicing. So it's a very vivid appearance. It's very vivid as an object of our mind, but it has no existence whatsoever. A moment of distraction and your visualization is totally gone. So Rinpoche explains it this way: being totally without essence or essential existence is the Dharmakaya. And this lucid image and the sense that this brings up of lucidity is the Sambhogakaya, and that it transcends concepts, transcends comparisons, and so forth. So the image of your body as a deity is really the display of your awareness, your empty mind. And it takes time to be able to do this, but it's merely content of the mind. A metaphor that I really like is that it is like the sun and the sun's light. This mind is the sun, the content is the light. And since the deity is appearing this way, it's the appearance of your mind, therefore your mind and the deity are inseparable. So the deity embodies and exhibits and demonstrates all the attributes of your mind. And quote, therefore, it is in the form of that image, the manifest three bodies or Trikaya. The deity's nature is your mind's unborn nature, end quote. So your mind is taking, you might say, the shape of the deity, but the deity is made out of light and it has no essence. It's just the display of your mind arising through your mind's power. Since this image is inseparable from your mind, this also means that your mind is the innate presence of the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Nirmanakaya. These are the same things that you meditate on when you practice Mahamudra. So this is the connection between deity practice and Mahamudra. And this is why Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche recommends for his students to practice various deities. Even though the book is titled Single Sufficient Virtue, there's a long list of things that he feels are important. And again, I personally feel that this book contains his final instructions to his students, which is practice, 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 and this is what to practice. I never asked him about that, but as I said, my copy of the book was given to me by Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, and he gave out a lot of copies of this book to his students. Now, to go on here, there is this idea of the pride of the deity. And now, ordinarily, pride is considered an afflictive state of mind. But here it is very different. It is that you're recognizing through this visualization, this image, what has always been the case, that your mind is the deity, that you are recognizing that all sound, all appearances, all thoughts are the display of the deity, that they are wisdom, sound is mantra, form is the body of the deity. Quote, you could destroy and effectively tear to shreds fixation on ordinary appearances, end quote, through doing deity practice. And then afterwards, in post-meditation, viewing all appearances as the body of the deity, all sound as the sound of the deity's mantra, and all thoughts, the mind of the deity, the wisdom of the deity. In ordinary experience, we're always making comparisons. It's always dualistic, comparing one thing to another. This is bigger than that. This blue, that is yellow. This tastes like da 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 da. Try describing what something tastes like without comparing it to anything else. Well, I had this, but it didn't taste like anything else I've ever had. Does that describe the taste? I find it interesting. I remember many, many, many years ago, long before I was a Buddhist, even going to wine tasting. And the person leading the wine tasting, of course, was trying to sell you wine. And they would have all these fantastic descriptions for the flavor of the wine. And it usually didn't taste that way to me. Now, in Wisconsin, we'll bring it really back home here. A cheese tasting party. Again, someone in Canada might not have the same taste as a person in Wisconsin about a particular cheese. So anyway, this is all dualistic, it's comparative, and you begin to realize that these comparisons have no ultimate nature. We begin to get a glimpse of the true nature of experience as being, again, the Trikaya, and that it's inseparable from our mind, it's inseparable from the deity, it's inseparable from the wisdom of the deity, and this cuts through everything. Then he talks about Sakavati or Dewa Chen. Basically, what Dewa Chen is the manifestation of the qualities of the ground of our being. That Dewa Chen is right here, right now. If you recognize it, it isn't that Dewa Chen is a long ways away. Dewa Chen, quote, is the self-appearance of wisdom. And this is what is meant in the Mahamudra lineage supplication, where it talks about seeing the inseparability of samsara and nirvana. So if we practice the generation stage properly, which is developing the visualization of ourselves as the deity, and the mandala and the surrounding being a pure land, this will uproot gradually our fixation on ourselves, fixation on there being an other. It will loosen our fixation on reality being solid as opposed to being more dreamlike. And what causes us to be attached and have aversion. So little by little, doing these Vajrayana visualizations, this generation stage, it becomes very powerful. Rinpoche says, again, you have to integrate them with refuge and bodhicitta in the beginning, dedication and aspirations at the end, and then gathering accumulations in the middle. Purification are in these deity practices. For instance, with gathering the accumulations of merit and wisdom, you make offerings. You emanate offering goddesses that make offerings while you're accumulating merit by making offerings. So all of this works very well, and it might not always be obvious how it is working. To sum up what Rinpoche has said, keep practicing. He says, on the other hand, if we do not integrate these practices, that we will waste our lives, that we will waste the opportunity that we now have. It will slip by. We will have accomplished nothing or very little. We'll become more and more obsessed with the world of appearances, impermanent phenomena. And as a result, we will continue to wander in samsara. And of course, there's no guarantee that our next life will be even as pleasant as our present life. We could have a much worse life next time around, which reminds me of a joke, and I just have to tell it because there's a 10-year-old inside of me that tells me I've got to tell it. It's about the man that was really stressed out, and he had heard some things about meditation. So he decided to go to a Buddhist center, and he got meditation instructions, and he attended teachings, and he practiced, and he meditated. And after a few years, he woke up one morning and he thought, I'm no longer stressed out about my life. Now I'm stressed out about my next life. So it's important to think about what your next life is going to be like. The question is, if one deity practice, when there is fruition, you realize all the deities, well, then why are there so many deity practices that we get initiated in? And you go to a center and they're doing a practice and you may not be doing it all privately in your own shrine room at home. Well, it's good to focus on one particular practice, but the others are good too. They accumulate merit and wisdom, and there's benefits from different practices. For instance, We do Chenrezig and Amitabha, one after the other here. And Amitabha is, you might say, preparing us for the time of death to be reborn in this pure land. And Chenrezig is intended to help generate this altruistic motivation, to generate compassion for all beings, especially for people that aren't doing advanced practices. This is a helpful reminder for what is necessary. They could be accomplished through one practice if you were a really good practitioner and you're really practicing. Green Tara is another one that we do, and Tara protects from the 8 fears. In fact, I'm going to be giving a teaching on the 8 fears soon. So it's good to know what those 8 fears are, because they're actually more metaphorical. One of them is fear of being eaten by a tiger. We don't have to fear that unless you go to the zoo, but it's a metaphorical for another type of fear, and so on. The next question is that in post-meditation, when we arise in the form of the deity, we are to have this pride of the deity, which is seeing all form as the body of the deity, all sound as the mantra of the deity, and all thought as the mind of the deity. And the questioner is saying that there's difficulty with the idea of the sound being the mantra. Well, what is being, you might say, conveyed here is that all sound is a unity of sound and emptiness. And I actually find sound easier to understand, because as soon as whatever is making the noise stops making it, the noise is gone. The noise does not, or the sound, take your pick. Is it a noise or is it a sound? But as soon as it can no longer be produced, the sound is gone. I quit talking and there was just silence. I think some people wish I would have more silence and talk less. But anyway, that's the way I relate to all sound as being the mantra, that it is, yes, you hear sound, but as soon as it's not being generated, it's gone. In a way, it's just vibration. My voice is just wind against my vocal cords, nothing more than that. So the question continued that the mantra have power because they've been repeated over and over again. They're in Sanskrit and so forth. Now, does all sound have that power? The point is, all mantra is this unity of sound and emptiness, that is the same. Now, obviously, it would be better if you would do medicine Buddha's mantra as opposed to my nose is like a raksha bead, but there is this similarity. And if we can have that understanding when we're going through our daily lives of this illusion-like sound that we experience, that really can help us understand the 3 kayas. Question is about offering goddesses. Who are they? Where do they come from? They are female bodhisattvas. One time, Rinpoche was asked the question, why are they female? His answer was, because they look better than men. And of course, the questioner was female, and she responded, well, I think men look pretty good. But that was Rinpoche's answer, that they look better than men. But they are, as I said, female bodhisattvas. They are in the Tashi prayer, and I gave a teaching on the Tashi prayer. It's on my YouTube channel, and I go into them a little bit there. But basically, they are female bodhisattvas. Each one holds a different offering, and they represent different qualities. So the question is, what does realizing the practice mean? And I am not 100% sure of the meaning of that question. So I'm going to give my answer to the best of my abilities, that as you practice one practice and you gradually mature and more obscurations are removed and your inner qualities develop, what it means is that you become that deity. You don't look like that deity, of course, you've got your ordinary body, but you become that deity, and those qualities manifest in you. The question is, can you explain the relationship that Rinpoche talked about between renunciation and the nature of mind? If we don't have some renunciation of samsara, this is going to block us from really experiencing the nature of mind. It's like you've got two different focuses. Oh, yes, I want to explain, experience, understand the nature of mind, but I kind of like it here in samsara too. To put it simply, it's like wanting to have your cake and eat it too. And you've got to say, okay, am I going to eat it or am I going to keep it? Or in this case, renounce it. You have to give up at least some attachment to samsara, unless you are a very exceptional person. There's always an exception, but in there earlier, we talked about how if you recognize the nature of your mind and that you can still be a cattle herder. You can still be a woman with her loom and a king and his retinue and so forth. But you still have to have that renunciation and placing much more emphasis on traveling the path than trying to, whether it be survive in samsara or progress in samsara, but putting this emphasis on the path and letting go as best you can of your attachment in samsara. The question is, Rinpoche mentioned that devotion is more important than pointing out instructions. The reason is, first of all, just because you receive pointing out instructions doesn't mean that you actually experience the nature of mind. It just means that you've been given the instructions. There's a saying, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek saying in the United States, when all else fails, follow the instructions. So you get the pointing out instructions and you don't get it. With devotion, you're going to pay more attention to the instructions your teacher gives you, and you're going to look into it. One person told me this. It had nothing to do with pointing out instructions. It was totally different. But with devotion, you're going to look at the DNA level of the pointing out instructions.